Good afternoon, everybody. Um, I have a special guest here. Been looking forward to this for a long time. Fellow veteran, right
Cool.
here, Vincent. I'm gonna let him. He does a great job. I don't want to chop it up. He'll do a great job at introducing himself and explaining to us how he started in this industry, and also where does he see the outlooks. But we're gonna have a good time just going back and forth and chopping it up about current things and trends, or best practices and just lessons learned and anything he's willing to offer us. Because the number one thing here too, Vincent, our mission, the reason why we feel like we've been successful over the last 4 months so far is we're mission driven, and our mission is to pay it forward. And our paying it forward is to a community of subscribers that all across the board, mostly CIOs and mostly CMOs and CHROs, but we have a lot of like folks that just got their CS degree, right? They just got the
Yeah.
computer science degree to get in industry, or somebody just got a C-suite job, things like that. So it's all things leadership. Anything you learned throughout your career that you feel like you would have told your younger self, or when you first got that job, and everything you know now, this is the platform for that. So I can't thank you enough for doing this for us. So if you don't mind, can you give me a little background on yourself and tell us, tell Next to Line community that who you are?
Yeah, sure. So, Vincent Shorter, I live in Chicagoland. I'm originally from a small town in Southwest Georgia. I spent a career in the U.S. Army, where I retired as a lieutenant colonel. Lived in
Yeah.
about 8 different states. Spent a little time in Kuwait, Honduras, et cetera, et cetera. Loved the military, and decided to retire. Had young kids and was missing a lot of things, so decided to retire. Moved into corporate. And in corporate, I worked, I think, in 5 different companies. Came in as a director of infrastructure, my
Nice.
first corporate job out of the military. And actually now I'm thinking of wrapping up the second phase of life as a CIO, and just have learned a lot, and really have been really, really fortunate in my career, in both of my careers, I guess I'll call it, culminating in one big career.
Wow. That's a well, first of all, thank you for your service.
Absolutely.
Um,
Thank you for
you
yours as
know,
well.
I appreciate that. You know how much that means to us, when people say that. So,
Yeah, I know.
especially I learned to like appreciate the military so much later in my life versus I was very young when I went into service. And I understand like so much more the value of everything that I learned there.
Yeah.
It transitioned in so many different ways, right?
Yep.
But wow. I mean, you retired you said, lieutenant colonel.
Yes.
That's a great accomplishment. That's not easy to
Yeah.
do. I was in the service, and you're a career military man. So what
Yes.
made you happy to get into the service right off the gate?
You know,
Something always
it's interesting. So I would love to say that it was some greater power or maybe something sort. But to be honest with you, I was, raised by a single mother. I had 2 younger sisters. I enrolled in college at Georgia Southern University, and
okay.
financially it was challenging.
Sure.
And so during the Christmas break, I was walking through the mall in Atlanta, and a
Oh,
recruiter at that time, he had full gear on. He was in the Army, and he said, "Hey, you ever thought about going to the military?" I said, "No, I'm in college." And he said these magical words to me. He said, "How would you like some money for college?"
whew. That
And
got
I
your
said, "Well,
attention?
I said, well, tell me more." And so I enlisted into the reserves, went to basic training, and then got out of basic training, went back to the university, enrolled in ROTC. And then after ROTC, I decided I want to go on active duty, and the rest is history. But it is one of the, and I won't say one, it is my best experience. I love the military. I love what it stands for. You talked about it a little bit.
Sure.
I love the things that I've learned. I think it made me a really good leader of
That's
people, which I value a lot.
absolutely, man. I mean, it's well, wow. So they told you in the mall, you didn't think you weren't going to the mall that day. You didn't think you were going to sign up for the service.
No, it was during Christmas break. So what do you do during Christmas break when you're in college? You're hanging out in the mall with your buddies.
Yeah.
And
How did your mom feel about that?
She was good with it. Yeah, she was good with it. I had kind of toyed around with the idea when I was in high school of going
Oh,
into the Air Force Academy, believe it or not.
whoa.
But decided not to because I just, I wanted to be I had only one uncle that had ever gone to college. So I was really wanted to go to college to kind of, from a family perspective. So yeah, she was fine with it. And this is the other thing is I was going into the reserve. So it was like, training during the summer, but then it would be 1 week in a month. So I just didn't want to miss any college. And that's what I told the recruiter.
That's so you
I didn't
finished
want to miss any college.
you went to school the whole time, and then that's when you made a decision. So you didn't have to go full active duty.
No, I did not. No.
What motivated you to do that?
I think a couple of things. One is I had really got connected and enjoyed the military. I enjoyed what I was learning. I enjoyed leading.
Sure.
When I graduated from college at that time, the job market was a little challenging.
Okay.
And so I said, but I was doing a lot of, uh, their terms that they use, but I was doing a lot of part-time work at the military unit.
Okay.
And then I inquired, I said, this is what I really like doing. Is there a way to do it? And they said, absolutely. And so that's
Oh,
when I went on active duty. Hmm.
they were happy. It said, "Is there a way to do it?" Of course. That's what, there's
Yeah.
some quotas over there, right?
Yeah. And so 22 years later, I retired.
23 years later, man. That's really, honestly, man. I did my 4 years, and I'll tell you, folks that stick it all the way and do it all the way, I just have a different level of respect, man, because you got to be very mobile and very willing, and
Yeah.
no matter what, right? There's
Yep.
no no in the. I try to tell everybody, there's no such
Yep.
thing.
Yep.
So,
You've got to go when it says go.
absolutely. So, what did you study? Did you study in technology, information technology in college, or did you learn that? Did you start that in the military?
So I was a business major
Okay.
in college. And then when I got commissioned in what they call the Adjutant General Corps, which is probably the closest to business as it relates to the military. But the way I got bit by the IT bug is
Uh
one
huh.
of my assignments was at a record center. And they had
Okay.
like 1.3 million records, and
Mhm.
they would write the social security number down on the front of the record, if you can imagine, and then there would be like a whole group of clerks that would check that record out, kind of like a library checkout, and they would be shipped all around the world. And so
Sure.
the lieutenant colonel, I was a second lieutenant, the lieutenant colonel at the time, took me to this cabinet. And in the
Okay.
cabinet, it had like barcode readers. And
Oh
then there
man.
was this one laser barcode reader. And he said, Lieutenant, you need to figure out how to get barcode labels on 1.2 million records. And so I learned the program. I went to seminars. I visited companies that were doing barcoding.
Oh wow.
And so I spent really, I would work until 8 in the evening just learning the technology. And eventually we got to a point that we were able to get labels on the record. So then all the clerks had to do is scan the label as opposed to keying in. Error rate goes down
Hmm.
because you're not doing the manual thing. And once I get
Sure.
by IT bug, I tried to figure out how could I get military training in information technology, and they do have that. And so
Absolutely.
I went to Fort Gordon and did 6 months of training, and then my career shifted from kind of the personnel space to the technology space, and that was it.
Personnel space, HR, kind of. Remember the I
HR, yeah,
didn't.
very similar to HR. HR, yeah,
Okay.
HR and military has some different components as you can imagine,
Uh huh.
but it was still HR. And then I went into IT and a lot of communications, satellite communications, things like that, which was really cool, really
That's
cool.
phenomenal. And so when you went into that side of the house, you started your IT career within the military. What
Hmm.
was the
Yeah,
first platforms? What were you responsible for outside? From an IT perspective.
yeah. So where I kind of learned the ropes was in databases.
Okay.
And so building databases, whether it was, and at that time we didn't have all the networking computers. We had uh, more of the monochrome screens and things like that.
Green
So it was a
screens.
lot of yeah, green screens, a lot of Linux, Unix, that type of training was what I started working on. Yep.
For sure. I was in supply, so aviation supply. So we were still like writing things out, airplane parts, and they were like, like the three different you had your green, slip, and then you had the pink. So that was filed in places. And then they finally got into, obviously computers and be able to condense that and do it the right way. So I just can't believe we used to operate like that for so long.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And part of my responsibility as my career went forward was to do exactly what we're trying to do: was get more units into automation as opposed and the technology as opposed to manual processes. And that's what I love about technology is how do you take manual processes and how do you make the business case and then automate things? And that's what really was exciting. It still is to this day, to be honest with you.
That's phenomenal. So I got a question about that, like, because it's going to walk it down a little bit there. So let's say in the military, how did it evolve? Like, are they quick to change from, let's say, from, open ideas from an IT perspective? Because this thing moves fast. IT moves really fast, right? And sometimes the military's, depending on where you're at, it could be move a little slower. You have to get a lot of yeses before we can move forward on things, right? But compared to corporate side, like, what do you feel was a little faster, like as far as ability to change or adopt a new technology?
That's an interesting question because if you think about the internet really evolved at the military. From a technology perspective, I don't really think the military. My experience in the military is that they were slow to adopt. When you think about weapon systems and advancement in those spaces, it's really important to have technology to do that.
Sure.
And when I served in the military, of course, I didn't have the vision of corporate environment. But I will tell you one thing I did learn, because sometimes people ask me, said, when you left the military, what was the hardest thing about adjusting to a corporate job and corporate role?
Great.
One of the things the military prides itself on is being able to make decisions. And so there's something called a military decision making process, MDMP. And basically, whoever the senior person is, you put together the courses of action. You may weigh the course of action. You brief that commander, general, whoever. You make a recommendation, and typically within a short period of time,
Hmm.
that person will make a decision, and you move forward. And as you
Okay.
can imagine, if you think about a military environment, particularly in a combat environment, you don't have a lot of time to uh, vacillate on what way you're going to go. You kind of have to be quick with decisions.
That's a
Um,
great point. Very good
in a
point.
corporate environment, my first role in the corporate environment, what I learned is that there are a lot of meetings and there are a
Got
lot
it.
of conversations around things, and it takes a little bit longer to move forward on things because a lot of people have to sign off on it to a certain extent. It's not a bad thing, it's just the way corporate works. Whereas in the military, you typically get someone who's responsible and accountable and a decision maker. So sometimes you can move a little bit faster on things
Faster.
in the military. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that because it's also
And
like
that's something I had to adjust to as well.
so you move a little faster than the corporate was probably somewhat a little slower. You had to maneuver or be a little more patient versus the military. You got it done. You went to your commanding officer. That was it. Done. Moving
Yeah, I had
forward.
to learn some new skills in corporate. Some patience, the meetings before the meetings,
The meetings
uh,
before me. I understand.
trying to get buy-in from not just one person but multiple people.
Sure.
And I'd say the first year or so it was a little challenging for me because I spent 20 years doing it one way, and now I had to figure out how to do it a different way to move things forward.
I had to condition yourself that different kind of muscles you had to use there, right?
You got it. You got
You
it.
know,
Yeah. Yeah.
so how was that transition for you in general? Like, did the military help with any type of like, say, job placement or, anything to help with that transitioning you into the corporate side?
When you leave the military, you go through a transition program. There's usually a place that kind of helps you to uh, convert your military skills to corporate skills, to the
Okay.
best of your ability. Like you was in supply chain, I'm sorry, you were in logistics, or they may call it supply chain, transportation, whatever on the corporate side. And so they kind of help you to do that. And then the
Okay.
other thing I had to work on was I didn't have a lot of corporate speak because military kind of talks in you know bottom line kind of things. But what I
Sure.
found is that in the organization that I worked in, the first organization, they appreciated some of the approaches that I had. Like I use the term bluff, which stands for bottom line up front. So in the military, they'll ask you, give me the bottom line up front. So you don't go through a whole story and then kind of say, this is what I'm really asking for. You kind of start with the bottom line up front. And a lot of my colleagues and peers in the corporate space kind of like that. They were like, oh yeah, I like that. Let's use that.
I did that. That's a
Yeah.
great nugget. I just wrote that one down because I didn't hear that one. That was an army thing. Maybe it's different for us in the Navy. I like that. Bluff, a bottom line up front.
Right.
That keeps a lot of that's a lot of noise just condensed. Hey, let's talk about it
Mm,
right away.
That's
Get it
key.
done.
Yeah. That's the key.
I love it, man. Because I had something like a little bit of I want to help a lot of folks in the military, help with that transition because right now there's such a shortage of talent, and what I love about folks in the military, they're moldable, they're very ready to move now, and I don't know if they're getting visibility to a lot of the opportunities out there. There's going to be like 85 million jobs between now and 2030 available just because of AI and the different types of positions that are available. So, and there's folks leaving the military all the time. I'd love to kind of maybe collaborate with you a little bit after this,
Yeah.
after the show like that, we can talk about it, but that would be helpful, to them.
Be glad
I,
to.
al- so I had a similar background. I came, I had to join the military and, I picked the Navy because I was like, well, I want to travel. I don't want to be stuck somewhere like, in the Midwest or something. I'm from New York, so
Mhm.
I understand.
I get it.
so, so as you got into so what was your first gig
Mhm.
outside the military? At what level and what were you responsible for?
Yeah. So once I left the military, well, I kind of do it in two pieces. Once I left the military, There was I think the website was called Dice.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, no,
Nice.
Dice, yeah. And
Oh,
so
very much.
I got a consulting job. I was in a consulting job for a year working from home. Had never done that, which was different because I found out you don't really do a 7:30. Military is typically 7:30 to 4:30, but if you
That's right.
in a global company, then you're going to have meetings 6, 7, 8 in the evening. So that was a little bit different approach, and you're not face to face. You're on, you're in looking at a screen or talking to people. But my first, I'd say, real role was a company called Monsanto, and they're not around anymore. But
Hmm.
someone I knew shared my resume, which kind of goes to that networking conversation that's different too. Maybe we'll talk about that
Oh,
with
absolutely.
someone there, and I got a call, and so I flew to St. Louis, interviewed with about 15 different people. And
Right.
at the time, the VP had several director roles available: infrastructure, I think applications development, et cetera, et cetera. And her offer to me was, "I'd like to hire you as director of infrastructure." And I shared with her, "Well, I've never led infrastructure before." But
Right.
this is one of the things she said, you can learn the technology. What I need is a leader.
Mm.
And I appreciated it. And she was right. I did learn the technology, but the challenge that they were faced at the time, they had a lot of unplanned outages,
Mm.
a lot of process challenges. And so I
Sure.
would say that as much as I was a little nervous about leading infrastructure because I never led infrastructure, I felt like I was the right person for the role because the technology was there. What they needed was process leadership and really kind of putting responsibility and accountability in place. And so that was my first
That's
gig
great.
out of the military, my first real gig out of the military, and I loved it. It was a director level role. I loved it.
That's a great first opportunity, and I love
Yeah,
the fact that you mentioned everything you mentioned there is so spot on because like I get often telling me a lot of my friends CIOs they tell me says the tech is one thing we can teach that man it's really mindset attitude. If you have great intangibles, you should be able to do any piece of technology because you started more on the database side, right, on the app side.
yeah. I was on the app database side in the military, and then of course some satellite communications is another thing when we would deploy and all of that. But I had never led infrastructure, and that at that time it was actually physical servers. So we had a data center
Mm.
with hundreds of servers in it.
Remember
And
those
so,
days?
and I was learning about VMware, virtual machines and things like that. But I had never had that kind of responsibility before. But I'm thankful that she put the trust in me to lead all of that for the entire global company.
That's a lot of responsibility and one heck of a leader. She gave you a lot of confidence to do it. So
Yeah.
what type of industry was that?
What do you make? What type of what?
What kind of industry? I know you mentioned the company name.
Agriculture company.
Yeah, because going through your background, like you had a really diverse, right? So you spent some time
Hmm.
in health. For I would
Hmm.
say, is it easy to say or safe to say healthcare mostly,
Yeah,
right?
healthcare. So yeah, healthcare mostly agricultural and consumer products
Okay,
were the three main. Yeah.
that's a lot of different, different lenses about different needs, business domains. What did you find, let's say, the most challenging out of all of them?
Hmm. I'd say healthcare.
Okay.
Um, Probably one of the biggest differences in healthcare is a lot of the compliance that's required. I think about, companies that I was with that, we made equipment and things like that you had to, it had to be spot on. For example, you couldn't tell someone that they had cancer when they really didn't, or the reverse. So you had to be really, really correct. And then the privacy aspects of healthcare, those are kind of the most challenging. Not saying that the other two were not. It's
For
just that there
sure.
are layers of compliance in healthcare that are not necessarily in some of the other areas.
Oh, definitely. That's zero room for error there. And then you're
Yeah,
right. The compliance is like a whole different. It's like another job in itself.
yeah.
Administrators daily. Um, so in healthcare, what type of healthcare in the healthcare industry? What type of healthcare did you have experience with? What kind of the companies that they did? Can you share a little bit of background about that?
Yeah, sure, sure. When I was, I name a company. So when I was at Abbott, as an example, I was global director for supply chain in diagnostics division. I think it has four different divisions. So, give you an example: when you go to the doctor and they draw blood, they do a panel and they come back and say, "Here's your cholesterol number. Here's all the other things." We
Sure.
made the big machines
Hmm.
that the sample will go in, but we also made the liquid that you would put into the blood sample, as an example, to get the results that goes into the machine. And so, as you can imagine, there was, to your point earlier, there's no room for error there. So that's what I
Sure.
did. And of course I did some stuff with, toward the end of COVID, I did some stuff with the COVID test, but it's all around diagnostics. That is diagnosing
Right.
situations and then having treatment for them or whatever that goes to your doctor. But yeah, and then the other was Cardinal Health. Of course, I'm no longer with them, but I was in what we call medical devices, similar. But you also had things like medical gloves and things of that nature that we produced as well. So it was manufacturing, but it was also supply distribution.
Wow. It's in those organizations, did you also, be a supply chain management? Like, did you have a lot of experience with ERP systems?
Yeah, yeah, ERP. Yeah, I'd say probably in all of them, primarily SAP. But there
SAP.
were some in some of the spaces there were some homegrown systems. You try to exit those when you can because there's a need in a small environment to have an ERP system. You have somebody really smart that can build an ERP system, and so part of the thing was how do you move off of those systems, but primarily SAP.
And everything that I'm picking up and, taking some notes here too, is like, you just went one global company after another.
Yeah, pretty much. The CFG company. Why am I drawing a blank? ConAgra was mostly U.S. and Canada, but the other ones have all been global.
That's that's pretty big outfit. I mean, and as far as from the amount of employees that were part of this organization, what did it range from?
I think I ranged from leading a team of say 20 to a team of 400.
Quite an accomplishment, man. You have just a phenomenal career track record, man. I mean, it's. And then when the first time I talked to you, I was like, you got a lot of experience, a lot of different domains, and also just like, very versatile too. So from infrastructure to ERP to, have you done things around, security and also, let's say, business intelligence and now AI? Have you done anything in those areas?
So, from a security perspective, there have depending on the manufacturing sites, particularly companies' information, making sure that we had the right security around our manufacturing locations and things like that. So yeah, not so much into cybersecurity, but if I lead infrastructure, I partner with cybersecurity on
That's right.
infrastructure because that's the way in the door. As an example, not a lot around business intelligence on AI. It was mostly has been around more the customer service piece
Sure.
in terms of leveraging emails and things like that with AI. Part of what, my experience with AI was really trying to put governance around AI,
I like.
educate around AI, because if you talk to five people, you're going to get five different answers on what AI is. So
Absolutely.
my objective with the leaders that I supported was to help them understand what AI is, what AI is not, and then what AI could be, but it may not be there yet. Because we can really get excited about new technologies and we kind of want it to be something that it's not. And then the
Sure.
leaders start saying, well, how come we can't do this? And you kind of have to explain to them, one, it's going to cost. Two, we
Yeah.
may not have the security and governance around it. And three, we want to try before we buy.
I love that. Those are great recommendations because, like, you have shadow IT. There's a lot of different things that get excited and they have the best intentions, but sometimes you got to be careful what you bring inside the doors,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
can get out of hand.
It
Um,
can.
so from a governance, so compliance and governance, especially in healthcare, right? You're talking about it's non-negotiable, right? You're
Yeah.
talking fine, talking shutdown. You're talking a lot of different things, a lot of issues that can happen for you guys. How did any lessons learned there? Like, any type of resistance you got that you say, a big lesson that you learned within your career from a governance and trying to get a mindset, conditioned to think that way. Anything there?
Yeah. I would say that two things. I think compliance, my experience with compliance is it's not hard because people understand that if you don't do compliance, whether it's with the FDA, whatever the government organization is, that you can shut down operations, right? And so people are generally on board with the need for compliance. The challenge that I face in compliance is the investment in technology to help compliance be more robust.
Sure.
And that's where you have to state the case because when you think about it from a corporate perspective, getting compliance doesn't necessarily increase revenue. It just
No.
kind of keeps you out of a challenging situation. And so be able to articulate a business case around the need for compliance when there are competing investments is a little bit challenging. But what I learned in that space is you have to try to communicate what will happen if things go wrong? What will be potential lost revenue? What will be all the things that could happen? And then you kind of get a little bit more attention in terms of what you're trying to invest. On the governance side, I wish there was another word other than governance, because when you talk to leaders and organizations about governance, they right away think you're limiting them. You're putting handcuffs on them. I can't do something. And the thing about governance is not that you're trying to limit what people can do. It's similar to compliance. You just want to have some guardrails
For
around it
sure.
so that things don't go wrong. But I've worked in IT almost my entire career, and IT people want to take they want to take the barriers down, and they want to go try stuff without any controls or limits. You try to set up an environment internally for them to be able to do that, but sometimes, people will move outside of that. I try to communicate governance from a perspective of risk, but also from a perspective of what we gain by having governance. Because as soon as
Gotcha.
I just learned, as soon as I walk in a meeting, I say governance, people go, "Oh God, here he is
This
talking about
guy,
what we can't do."
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
You try to
yeah.
slow me down, or there's a perception,
Slow me
but
down.
something you mentioned that I really want to point out too, because you said it doesn't necessarily, gain revenue, but protect revenue is probably the
It
perspective, right?
is. It
Right.
is.
It's hard enough to get it. Let's protect it, right?
Yeah, it
It's a
is.
big.
Absolutely.
So, I could relate to that because in my company, I'm an entrepreneur, so I've been doing that since '04, and I'm all about like, let growth and move forward. So when I hear things, I'm like, somebody told me this one day, said, let's keep what we have first, right? And this is how we keep that, or we can lose it if we don't do this, like,
Yeah,
governance or
that's
compliance.
good.
The compliance is like this, it's just non-negotiable. It's like paying the light bill, no matter what, sure you do it. Anything there from political, any best practice or which way, if somebody's resisting on something like that, what kind of advice would you give somebody in that chair that's responsible for that area to help communicate more effectively?
Well, one of the things I think is you can't be the person that just goes no. I think sometimes when you're in charge of a governance of an environment, uh, I won't say it can go to your head. That's kind of what went through my mind, but you can kind of feel like I just need to stop everybody. I think you need to have a dialogue about what can be. I'll give you an example. At one point, when I led application development, and we had changes to the environment, where change management within making upgrades to the system and things like that. I challenged my team to say, "Okay, I get we don't want anybody to blow up the environment." I said, "However, how can we think about a self-service model? For example, if you can remember a time where the only way you checked out in a grocery store, you had to go to a person and they would scan your products, right? And then
Oh
we
yeah,
moved into a self-service environment, self-checkout, right? But there are checks and balances in place to try to make sure that self-checkout works. So you scan your item, there's a weight thing that knows what the weight of the item is, you put it on there. If you take it off
that's
too
right.
soon, it'll beep at you. So what I challenge my team is, let's look at that model and say, how can we do changes to our environment, have somewhat of a self-service model or self-checkout model that
Hmm.
has some controls around it. So we allow people to self-checkout, but we don't just let them walk out of the store with it.
Oh yeah. And then that, what is it, 10 items or less? Like if they walk out, it's not going to be as bad as it's like taking the
Yeah.
house. Right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that's a great perspective. Um, if you don't mind, I'd like to touch a little bit more on some lessons learned here because that's usually a great, you know, um, people call failure or whatever, things like that. But people, that's where you learn most of the time, right?
Hmm.
It, anything that in your career, like that was pivotal that you say, I could have maybe done that one different, or maybe even seeing something like that it could have been handled differently, based on what you know now. Because you typically, at least I've experienced, sometimes you don't know, or you may didn't follow the gut, and all of a sudden, like something happened that could have been prevented, but now any of those pivotal times in your career that you said you could have wished you went back.
Yeah, I can think of two, and I'm not going to try to put not put any names out there. But if you think
Of course.
about one thing I'm big on is, excuse me, I'm big on testing. I'm big on UAT,
Great.
uh, because I think you got to prevent before you go into production. Um, there was one particular instance where there was a lot of pressure to go into production, and
Okay.
I went against my my belief which is
Okay.
we have got to adequately do testing, UAT, whatever whatever the term a company would use, and we accelerated production, and it didn't go well. It didn't go. Now, at the end of the day, it was my responsibility, and so, but I didn't communicate the risk properly of going into
Okay.
production, and I allowed myself to be, how do I say it, influenced even by some of my own team members saying it'll be fine. But I knew in my gut
You
that it
got it.
wasn't right, and I went with it. Another time was, we were doing an ERP transformation. We had an old legacy system, and with legacy systems, a lot of times people who have ran those systems for 20, 30 years have moved on or either are retired. And so we didn't have enough of those resources available for that transition.
Mhm.
And so, for the transition from the legacy system to the new ERP system.
For
And
sure.
so, what I didn't do was I didn't push hard enough on, maybe we need to go find and outsource some people. Maybe we need to see if there are some other people that know this system. Maybe we can hire a partner to help us with this, because it was a tight budget. Well, what ended up happening is we were not able to deliver on time because of those challenges. We had to go
Okay.
back and ask for more money and more time, and that was some humble pie that I didn't want to eat. But again, I felt like we didn't have enough. I didn't push on it hard enough, and on the back end, I had to basically say I made a mistake. And that's the other
Gotcha.
thing I think that's really important for leaders, in my opinion, is you need to say you made a mistake. You need to say I made a mistake, but this is what I'm going to do to try to fix it. Sometimes with leaders, it's, well, it was that person this first, but if you're responsible and accountable, it's on you, good, bad, or ugly.
It is. I mean, ownership is like, that's the truth. To me, that's where the leaders need to step up, right? You own it, you own it. Now what's the next
Yep.
plan, right? How do we make it
Yep.
work now? Would you say it's
Yep.
something that trust? Would you give advice like trust your gut? It's usually right.
I would say trust your gut. But I would also say the questions you're thinking about asking and you're not asking, you need to ask it.
Oh, I like
Yeah.
that. That's a
Yeah.
really good one, Vince.
Yeah.
Marketing team's gonna love that one. That's actually excellent. Excellent.
Yeah.
I want to say that one a lot. Let me ask you this. So you talked about some of that, and I appreciate you sharing that, by the way. Not everybody's, you know, uh, I don't want to say brave enough, but like, confident enough to actually mention those things, because there's no, to get your first chance to the C-suite, I want to kind of get there. It's never a straight line. It's usually this way, that
Yeah.
way,
Yeah.
pivots. What was your first opportunity to be a CIO?
What was it like, or what was my
Oh,
first job?
when was like, what was the first opportunity? So you went, director of infrastructure. You kind of spent a lot of different areas. When did you get your first shot? Like, what year was it? Did you get your first shot to become a CIO?
What is this? I say 2023,
Okay.
2022, 2022. I'm sorry, 2022.
2022?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because it was, I was director for a pretty long time, whether it was a North America director, global director. Before a
Mhm.
great amount of time, I was a director, and then it just seemed like it went from director to VP to CIO in a shorter
Okay.
period of time.
Oh, so you kind of rolled like this for a while, and then just when it
Yep,
happened, so you started flying, right? It's just
yep,
started happening.
it really did. It went quick. Yep.
And what industry were you in at the time that you had that first shot?
Healthcare,
All right, so the one with the
healthcare.
hardest one with all the compliance on
Yeah,
top.
yeah, healthcare.
So
Yeah.
anything like, I love asking this question. When you got that first shot, was there anybody that, that helped you like from a mentorship, say, you know what, that their advice or really kind of helped me get to that next level, or at the same time, what would you have told yourself today? Everything you know now, what would you tell that guy? What would you tell Vince when he first got that job
The
to be ready?
CIO job.
Yeah, to be ready for like everything you know now. What would you tell yourself? 2022, be ready for blank, blank, and blank. Your first time as a CIO.
I'd say be ready for uh, all the things that are around budgets and financing. I'd spent I had an opportunity to really learn about finance, because if I go back in time, in the military, your budget's run on fiscal year, you have a zero-based budget, but when you go to corporate, there's a different budget, particularly in a for-profit environment. And so learning about finances and budgeting was really important, but it goes to another level when you get to CIO, because now you're in a situation where IT costs so much, the company is trying to make revenue. There are other services that cost so much, but then IT has a microscope on it because it's a very expensive proposition.
It is.
One of the things that you said, what I've told myself, one of the things that I would have really would say focus on is what is the true cost of IT to the business, not the true cost of just IT. For example, if I've got an ERP and that ERP and I'm responsible for the cost of that ERP, where does that ERP lie in terms of servicing the various departments in a company? And I think you
Sure.
want to be able to show back those costs because otherwise it looks like IT just costs a lot of money.
That's right.
Whereas IT doesn't exist just for the sake of IT. IT exists to provide services across the enterprise. And I think you got to try to figure out how to break that down and provide those services. I was in a company where they had what they call bill back. And I'm sure you probably heard that term, where if I provide your service, this is what it costs you, you got to pay me back. Not a lot of companies do that. Well, I at least want to be able to show you what
Why not?
it costs to provide those services. And then I can ask you, well, what do you want to, if you tell me IT budget has to be reduced, then I can say, well, what do you want me to reduce from your area of the services that I provide you? And
I
I
like
think you
that.
can have I think you can have a better dialogue around cost. So I'd say that's one is cost and thinking about how do you
I
have
like
the conversation around IT costs? The other thing I would say is, um, making sure that you're getting connected with the next level of executives.
okay.
And that's a little bit challenging because they're really busy, but you also have a point of view and and sometimes within IT, if you've got a CEO that's running the business, then
Hmm.
IT has to figure out how to get in there and have conversations with those various executives. That's another thing that's really is building relationships with the executives
Across the organization. In
across the
the,
organization and the most
in that,
senior executives at that.
absolutely. You as a CIO, what was the reporting structure? Do you report, was it a seat at the table with along with COO, CFO, like the entire C-suite?
Yeah, so I reported to the CEO of one of the major divisions of the company, and then that was a dotted line relationship, and then I reported to the global CIO, who reported to the company CEO.
CEO. Okay. That was a big
Yeah,
organization. Very, very
yeah,
big.
yeah. So I was one removed from the one reporting removed from the CEO of the entire company.
So, you mentioned relationships and amongst executives. I can't, uh, you're so spot on with that because I think that is vital. I mean, you have to understand the business as much as you know the IT stuff.
Hmm. Hmm.
It, you say IT is, a friend of mine says, CIO friends, IT is the business now. You
Yeah,
know, it truly is. I mean, what company out there, typically cannot operate or deliver goods or services, whatever they do, whatever line of business they're mostly a technology first company. Then whatever domain they're in or whatever they're,
yeah,
marketing or. So I have a good friend that's actually a CEO of a furniture company, and he goes, "We're a technology company, just sells furniture."
yeah, yeah,
I was like, "That's a different business," but that's where the business and the market's going. Yeah.
yeah.
So,
And you'll hear a lot of CEOs say that, I think.
oh yeah, definitely. Let me ask you a question. What leadership decision you said, because you've been a leader for quite some long time, from the military and in corporate, you sat in so many different seats. What leadership decision have you made that you're really proud of?
Y- I think more so than like a technology, I think it's caring and developing my people. It really does for me. If I have someone that's been on my team, and I really pour into them and help develop them, and then they go off to another role, and just to see them ascend, whether it's with the company I'm in or in another company, to see them on LinkedIn as an example, and they're now at 2, 3 levels higher. I can have a sense of pride in that, in
Sure.
knowing that I felt like I poured something into them. Not I'm not responsible for what they accomplished, but it makes me feel good to see that. That's the biggest. There's a saying that um, they may not remember what you did, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And
Oh
for
yeah.
me, it's all about having those relationships with people, pouring into them, developing them, listening to them, and helping them grow. That's what I get a lot of pride in.
That's great. I had to share with you a little about this one. So a really good friend of mine too, he asked a leadership question always is how many people that work for you that have advanced in their career?
Yeah.
He goes, that to me, that's it's usually a good indication of leadership and mentorship, giving
Yeah.
people that to kind of help them pave the way. So that's a good one. I love that you said that. That's phenomenal. What would you
One other
say?
thing I would add to that, Caesar, is I think you also, there's a phrase that we use sometimes that I try to stay away from is keep doing what you're doing. Because I don't, sorry, what does that mean? But I'm always, not was, but I'm always willing to share with you what you're doing great, but I'm also willing to share with you from my vantage point what I see you can improve upon. And I think sometimes we don't do that as much as we should. Because I've been in situations where I've gone to my leader and say, hey, how do I improve? What do I need to do differently? And they'll say, well, just keep doing what you're doing. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not perfect here. So there's
Yeah,
something that I could do differently. So being able to give that feedback as well. And also when they messed up, let them know here's what you could have done differently, or ask them what you could have done differently. So coaching and mentoring is just not being the cheerleader. It's really around having those tough conversations too, because
I,
that's where growth comes in a lot of time.
I love that you said that, man. Because I completely agree with you. Like, you know, your leader is not just making sure that you're right. You don't have to be a cheerleader all the time. I mean, it's almost like is that realistic? People are people. I mean,
Mhm.
people think everybody needs to work on things, right? On something.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with like that when you, let's say, when you are that, you give that type of, feedback and they're not accepting that kind of feedback? How do you deal with that?
Oh, I've had those situations.
Once or
Um,
twice?
oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'd say a couple of things. I think one is, they'll only gonna, you can't make anybody hear what you're trying to say. I'm big on asking questions and when, tell me what you think, or how did you feel about this, or giving a scenario and say, what do you think you could have done differently? So hopefully they can see it. The other thing is I try to do is help them to talk to someone other than myself, who I have trust and confidence in that they're going to also share. Because sometimes if I hear the same thing from three different leaders, then maybe there's something there. But yeah, I've even had situations these where someone didn't like the feedback I gave them and just really just stopped talking to me.
Oh
And
Lord.
that was probably one of the toughest experiences. I know some of the questions that were sent earlier. What was one of the toughest? That was probably one of the toughest things because I truly care about people and them doing well. But like I said before, I just can't sugarcoat it when it didn't go well or something messed up. But I've had some people that just kind of was like, they didn't, I mean, they would pass me in the hall. It's not a lot. It's only like two or three in my career and just would
Sure.
not even want to speak to me because they were upset.
But I feel like when people ask for that feedback, I want, direct feedback. I want this, and you create that, and then that can't last for a long time. I mean, that's
Yeah.
kind of challenging. I mean, any lessons there, like maybe a different approach, or was it just like was that the individual, like that's who they
I
are?
think, I think, and I think it was the individual. And I think about two in particular. I think it was the individual. Um, and what I learned was you can't always reach everybody. I say that really in balance too, because I might have gotten feedback in my career and I'm like, you don't even know what you're talking about. In my head, I'm thinking that, right? But that then as I talked to other people who had led these two people I'm thinking about in particular, they had similar experience with the person.
So it's okay. So now you know that it wasn't that it's not in your head.
Yeah, yeah. Because I asked, I'm like, well, how was your experience with this person? They'll say, yeah, this is what happened. And I'm thinking, okay, all right, well, because to your question, I always ask myself, what could I've said or done differently?
So you take that. So that's good advice too. So you take it back and you just check in and make sure that you didn't miss anything, right?
Yeah,
Maybe that
yeah.
perspective. So you're dating that sense. What would you say? Kind of mixing the two here, but like, what was the toughest leadership challenge you ever faced? Like you had to make toughest call you had to make as a CIO.
Um, Probably reduction in forces. When you have people, you got to say, hey, unfortunately, we're in a situation where we gotta, those are tough. Those are tough. because it's livelihood and it's all the things and pride and all that goes with it. That's the hardest thing. Um,
That's hard. That's really hard. Because sometimes those things are most of the time like even out of our control to perspective. You
it
can't.
absolutely was. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're delivering the message primarily. But yeah.
How is it typically? I don't know. Every company could be a little different, but like, let's say, how is that decided? Okay, like you have a certain budget, you have to figure out. You pick on what you need the most, or is it kind of like this is what's got to happen? These folks got to be reduced.
I think a couple of things happen. I think, one, you kind of look at the work and you say, well, can I consolidate some work?
That's
So
right.
for example, let's say you got, I'm just going to throw something out. Let's say you got four different leaders that lead four different areas. Can you consolidate two of those? Can you consolidate those four into two,
Okay.
and then have two leaders instead of four leaders? Because you'll get in some places you get a number and say I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but this is the number you've got to
Oh,
hit.
yeah. I guess
Yeah.
that's what I was trying to land on. So that
Yeah.
that I guess that's I don't know if that's helpful or not, but like then you got to just decide like what can you like you said that's a great practice.
Yeah.
What can I
Yeah.
accommodate?
What? Yeah.
Who's versatile? You
Yeah.
know,
What can I consolidate? What can we do without? What can we sometimes just, and you've probably seen this a lot, sometimes you outsource because you say it's going to cost less money. If I outsource this particular amount of work to someone,
for sure.
it's going to cost less money. But as a leader, you have to make those calls and those decisions, and those aren't easy. And one thing I've learned is that it's rarely personal.
No matter what.
Yeah, yeah. It's like I don't like that person, so I'm gonna. It's not that. It's
No, no.
I got. Yeah,
You feel
yeah.
like that, even though like it's not, it truly is not like in us, like, yourself, like, but when you're given that message, do they take it that way?
It's really interesting. My experience, and not just CIO, but just in my experience over the years. Some people, depending on, this may be funny, but some people, depending on what that package looks like, maybe they're like, cool.
Hit me up
Uh,
first.
yeah, you can like put me in, coach, or take me out, coach, depending on depending on the terminology. Uh,
No,
and then sometimes it can be very emotional. Um,
no, it is. Yeah, it's scary,
yeah,
especially because, you're talking about people, you're talking about where they spend most of their time, you talk about families, liabilities. That all is a factor. No matter what, if you're given marching orders or whatever, you still feel that.
yeah,
You
you
still
feel
feel
that.
that
Yeah,
as a, and it's a horrible feeling. It takes
it,
time
it,
to.
it It is, and I always I always thought and still do think that sometimes things can be a blessing in disguise. And the majority of time, I would say that either personally or where I've seen other people that I've worked with that left the company, they've gone on to do bigger and better things. Sometimes it's just a matter of you may want to move and may want to do and you don't do, and then it's kind of forced upon you, and then you start looking at, I always wanted to do X, and
Absolutely.
then they'll go off and do it. So it's not. Sometimes there's a silver lining in that, and I've often seen that.
Always. I'm glad you said that because I like to talk to like double click a little bit on that one. But this silver lining, I feel like in any adversity, and in any
Hmm.
failure or whatever. Like, how do you communicate, or create an environment, for your team to like it's okay to fail to a certain respect,
Oh
like
yeah,
tell me about that. Share me about your approach there.
yeah. Well, so for me, I always tell my team status quo is boring. So I want you to try. I want you to push the envelope, see what you can do, take risk. But it can't be crazy risk. It's got to be risk that's measured. Um, but I want them to try things. That's why I'm a big believer in POCs and things like that, so we can really try it before we buy it. I used that term earlier.
I like that.
But I really want them saying what ifs, what's possible. So
Mhm.
I encourage that. And this is the other thing. If you go down that road and we agree to go down that road, you can be sure one thing: I'm not going to throw you under the bus. I'm going to be the one. If it doesn't work out, I'm not going to say, well, it was Caesar's idea. I didn't tell him to do it. I'm going to say, you know what? I agreed with it. I thought it was a great move. It didn't work out like we thought it would. I own it.
Man, that's leadership all day. That's I'm trying
Yeah.
to figure out like, I want to say military, help with that kind of condition or something
Oh
like
yeah,
in,
oh yeah.
right?
And you, if you watch the news, you'll see any military news. You'll see you have a commander of a 200 person unit, and one person does something, and then the commander gets fired because that's who's responsible and accountable. And sometimes you have no necessarily control on it, but the leader sets the culture.
100% is
Yeah,
no
the
matter
leader sets
what.
the culture. Yeah.
You
And if
know, that's
and if something goes wrong, maybe it's because of the culture that that leader has put in place. But at the end of the day, the military, you're responsible and accountable. You stand in front of the formation,
absolutely.
and it's your unit. And so I've taken that. You know, I used to use the term one. I still do, but I think I got from military. You know, you pin the roles on one person. Like for example, earlier I was telling you about when I led infrastructure when I first, first job. Well,
Yeah.
they would do like changes to the environment. You know, you do changes overnight, et cetera, et cetera. And so when I first sat down with them to walk through what's the plan, and I
Mm,
said, well, who's responsible for that? And they
that's
said,
right.
well, it's Mary, Jim, and Joe. I'm like, no,
Okay.
no, 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 no. Only one person is responsible. We don't have three because if everybody's responsible, nobody's responsible. So
That's right.
who owns this? It's got to be a person. It can't be three people. And I think that's where you start to drive responsibility and accountability.
I agree. Yeah. How important is that? I mean, you said teams from to, I think you said up to 400, right?
Yeah.
That
Hmm.
that's a lot. I mean, how
Hmm.
many, how many direct reports out of something like that in that type of organization did you have that you had to hold accountable to help them hold other people accountable?
I think it was five. Yeah, five direct reports.
That's
And at the end of the day, it's not holding them accountable to try to punish or anything like that. It's really around if you hold me accountable for what I'm responsible. I'm going to hold you accountable for what you're responsible for. But I tried to make sure that I met for those direct reports. I met with their leaders at least once a month. So I wanted that message to get directly to them as well. So I'm big on touching as many people as I possibly can. Of course, the larger the organization, the less you
hard.
can do. But at a minimum, I wanted to touch all those leaders at least quarterly. At least
How
quarterly.
that's great. And how often, like, just kind of reminding people the mission, that North Star.
Always, always. I'm big on having a vision. I'm big on having a why. And what I used to always tell my team is your why is not because it's a technology why, it's a business why.
That's
We want
right.
to sell more product. And so you
That's
got
right.
to back it up and say, how do I, sitting in this seat, working on this technology, help us sell more product? How do I, sitting in this seat, help us manufacture quality products? How do I, sitting in this seat, help us, whatever it is, directly related to the company's mission, more so than my mission as an IT professional?
That's that advice right there, right there. I mean, I'm gonna play that one back because let me tell you, like, I think that's the big transition. I think, that's to me, like from going either director, manager or whatever
Hmm.
to that C-suite is that you have to understand the business. You have
Yeah,
to understand that why. And the tech is not just to bring tech to tech.
yeah,
It's
no, no,
right. What would you say? People first, right?
yeah,
Then
yeah.
process and then tech. But like I think that's if you understand why and you can help increase and enable revenue, now you're talking about like trajectories, right? You're talking great opportunities for yourself. That's what I
And
see.
And you got to help the team see that because if I'm an infrastructure person, it may be hard for me to see how what I do connects to revenue. And so you got to help them with that. And the way you help them with that, I know you got to help them with it. I'm not giving you a recommendation, is you bring some of the business leaders in to say, when the system is up 99.9% of the time, we're able to do this. Or when the system went down, we were not able to manufacture product, which put us behind from our planning and manufacturing and transportation goals. So they can start to see how what they do, either positively or not positively, impacts the business. You can't just tell them. You got to have business leaders come in and help share it. And then they can ask that person questions and then
I'm
you
taking
start to tie it together a little bit more.
and this is like this one thing is kind of like a personal cool advantage I have on doing these podcasts. What's fun is like it's like free advisory services. It's just phenomenal, man.
Yeah.
Um, what I like about that, I haven't heard that one. I mean, the fact that you bring some of the business leaders to the IT.
Hmm.
Someone had that with me. They may do it, but I'm telling you right now, somebody has to share that with me. And I love that because, IT can be, if it's quiet and nothing's outages, right? That's a good thing, right? Sometimes you
Yeah,
don't know,
yeah.
like, and then all of a sudden, would you say it could be a thankless job at times?
Yeah, when I first started, particularly when I led infrastructure, I used to always tell the team, if nobody's talking about us, that's a good thing.
Celebrate.
Because that's the way it is. I use this example. When you walk into your house, you walk into your office. Let's say your office building. Let's go pre-pandemic when everybody was going to office. You go in office and you hit the light. Some sort of switch on the wall. What is your expectation? The light's gonna come on.
Oh yeah, 100%.
The one time that light doesn't come on, you're like, what is happening? So the same thing was true in infrastructure. People just expected for it to work. And when it didn't work, what in the world is happening? What is IT doing? So
Oh,
yeah,
or
yeah,
label like this is, the IT department's blank and blank,
yeah,
or,
yeah,
oh, this is that they get crushed, right? They constantly
yeah.
getting crushed.
Well, there are two
Um,
things. One is that light switch better come on
yeah.
99.9% of the time. And two, when it doesn't come on, it better not be off more than what we're patient to have. So if you think about an outage, yeah, we're going to have outages because it's technology, but getting
Sure.
things back up as fast as possible is important because it starts, the clock ticks.
Oh, definitely. Like I think was it like maybe less than 10 days ago, Amazon East went down. I mean,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah. Yeah.
AWS
I saw
obviously
that.
some big
Yeah.
companies. So
Yeah.
I in the side and they publish who the companies are. I'm like, whoa, that's gazillions of dollars down right now, right?
It's funny because my wife and I were in South Africa and we were trying to get on our United app and something it wasn't working right. We're like, man, I can't get this. I can't get that. Well, come to find out that was the time that AWS went down
I
and they
was in
service so
Denver.
much. They service so much now that, yeah, yeah.
It's wild. So, you mentioned like you bring some of the business leaders over.
Hmm.
Um, you ever bring some of the IT, some of the folks to the business as well and
Hmm.
let them
Yeah.
like
Yep.
the
Yep.
impact they
Did
make,
both.
you
Hmm.
know? Is it hard to like come up with like what's the best practice to like kind of show like when you have 99, if you don't have that, what the financial impact is?
You mean
Like,
in terms of outage?
yeah, let's say an outage. I guess it depends on the
Yeah.
company. Like what kind of, impact that, let's say this application goes out with a new feature and now they get more revenue. What does that translate to the company? Because those numbers sometimes are profound. It could be big.
Yeah. That's a partnership with the business. So two things, if I heard you correctly. One is when something goes out, how do you kind of articulate what was the financial impact? And so you work with the business in terms of whether if it's a supply chain space or sales space or whatever to be able to say this was the impact. The other side is a little bit more challenging. So you implement a new technology. What is the revenue or sales as a result of that? Um, what you have to do in that space is you have to have a baseline prior to the technology. And I've learned that
Mm,
oftentimes what we don't have is we don't have the before picture
yes.
to be able to say what was the growth in the after picture. So I would say if you're going to implement a new technology, spend some time doing a study around what is the current numbers right now so that you can then look at the future state and see what the numbers are. Because otherwise, you're just kind of guessing.
Sure.
But you want to do a baseline of how are things now. So
Wow. When I'm listening and these are phenomenal like nuggets and advice. Like this is the CIO role has evolved so much. Like I feel like
oh
it's
yeah,
business first versus technology all day.
yeah,
Is that
IT is involved so much.
would you say more like it's a business leader role and then it's like you're handling the technology aspect of it, but it's a business first.
Yeah, if I had for me, I would say that one thing I would recommend to anyone who is a business facing IT person is to really not just sit in meetings and only be the person that when the Zoom's not working, that's what you're there for. You really and that, but you'll be called on for those things, right? Because you're the IT person. But
This is something.
really try to understand and ask questions, even if you don't understand, try to be engaged in the conversation around maybe asking why do we do that on the business side? Because I think that interaction is important. And there are times that I've kind of been kind of just sat there and not did as much. And then there are times that I'm very inquisitive. I think it's important to be inquisitive because it shows business leaders that you have an interest in the business, but it also can educate you. And then I try to get with leaders after the fact, business leaders, and say, tell me more. For example, if I'm in an organization that has a sales team, I'm always trying to go out on sales calls
Oh,
because
nice.
I want to understand. Even here in Chicago, I've gone out on several sales calls because I want to understand
Sure.
where are your gaps? How is the technology working? Where is there no technology that could be helpful? And I can't do that just in a meeting with PowerPoints. For me, I can't do it in a meeting with PowerPoint slides.
That's awesome. You're on the front line. You're on the front line hearing it from the prospective customers. That's huge.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah,
partnership, right? I mean, that's kind of like
yeah,
from a relationship and like that executive leadership relationship. I'm assuming that's got to be phenomenal.
yeah, yeah.
I'm sure you're getting good feedback over that.
Yeah, and it's something I really enjoyed. And again, you talked about the military. Military has the term boots on the ground.
That's right.
And I always felt like I need to get boots on the ground. So I can hear you, I can follow a PowerPoint, but unless I'm actually walking that ground with you, um, I really can't get it to the extent from the PowerPoint as I can get it from being in the action with you and
Uh,
listening and learning and asking questions.
and understand so that we
Yeah,
can as a strategy.
yeah,
Let me ask you this as we wrapping up. Let me ask you this because I got some narratives from you that I feel like why is definitely a big one. Why is a big one for you? Like
yeah,
across the board, it's universal. What would you, from an AI perspective, right? This is like incredibly hot. Everybody's talking about it every other day, right? There's one up, and every company's one up each other. They're advancing so fast. You know, what advice would you give you as an advisor, let's say to CIOs? You know, what advice would you give for them on like, when their business is saying we have to move fast, like we don't want to be left behind.
yeah, yeah. There's a book called Leading Digital. It kind of talks about that in terms of you're a fast follower or a fashionista. It's one of my favorite books around the four quadrants of what you're kind of describing. And one of the things that it does kind of help you with is helping to articulate why you want to do what you want to do. For example, you don't want to be left behind, but are you willing to invest a lot of money into something that's a maybe?
Hmm,
Um, or are you willing to be a fast follower? That is, let somebody else kind of go out there first. And you learn from kind of those perspectives. You don't want to be so behind that you don't get caught up. So you have to I think with the leadership, you have to find out where they are. Because you could have money that you've invested, you'll learn from it, but you may not get any return on that investment if you want to be first to market with some type of technology. But you don't want to be so slow because you're in a competitive environment. So there's no easy answer. But I think the
no,
key is where is the leadership in this? But you articulate, again, Leading Digital is a great book for that. You articulate those four quadrants and say, here are pros and cons to each one of those. And
right?
then kind of say, where do you want to be? Because at the end of the day, it's the corporation that's got to make the decision on where to spend the money.
Absolutely. And do you think some of those folks that was, by the way, I wrote that down, leading digital. I'm definitely gonna check that out in those quadrants. So do you feel like sometimes people want like I know you're kind of where do you want to be, but but help me understand where should we be? You're part of the leadership team. Like help me decide this.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. I think you always, for me, I think you always make a recommendation. Yeah, you always make and going back to what I told you earlier, if I sit down with the leader in the military, I'll talk about courses of action. I'm going to tell you what the four courses of action are. I'm going to tell you the positive and the negatives associated with the four, but then I'm going to make a recommendation on one of
okay,
those courses of action. I'm not going to just say, you decide. I'm going to say, this is what I recommend,
sure.
and then you decide. But I want to give you what I think that we should do.
I love that. And outside, do you have any, as a leader, do you recommend like because you have your what do you call it, executive partners, right? You deal with that and you kind of bounce each other, you collaborate. But do you support or leverage any outside like objective people, like let's say like a safe conversation with maybe some past leaders that you talk to kind of help you with
Oh
that?
yeah. Oh yeah, I have a mentor who was a CIO of another company, and I value her perspective. I bounce a lot of things off of her. I ask about approaches. She's been a CIO for much longer. I ask about approaches. What would you do in this scenario? it's extremely helpful. And then there are also some other organizations out there that don't sell you a product that I think
Sure.
can also give you some perspectives as well. But I have about two or three people that are in technology or HR or CEO of a company that I can kind of say, what do you think? Here's what
Right.
I'm thinking. How do I communicate this? Or I may say, I'm having a tough time getting through. What do I
Hmm.
need to do? Excuse me. What do I need to do to maybe to say it differently? And I get that feedback.
I
Yeah,
love that.
one of the things I was thinking about this earlier. Don't be on an island. You know,
Oh
have
man,
some people that you trust that you can go to and get their perspective. It's still your call, but you
of course,
want to. You know, I want to talk to people who have been where I'm going.
absolutely.
Because they'll help me they'll help me to accelerate the pace, and
Or
also
like, you
hopefully not to stub my toe too often.
know, oh yeah, somebody that been hit the landmines already, right? To tell you kind of guiding around that. So I do have, I agree with you. I think having a mentor, a short Rolodex, very short group of
Yeah,
people, like,
yeah, yeah,
hey,
yeah,
keep it. I have one that I text and say I need to talk to you at 9 tonight. One of those, and
yeah,
I'm telling
yeah,
crazy, tell me if I'm going on the wrong path. And what I love about that is it's completely objective,
yeah,
you know, and they kind of know you a little bit. And, either they tell you, yeah, you're being kind of crazy. I'm okay with that because I
yeah,
value that
yeah,
person's, but that's,
yeah, yeah.
um, Vince, I mean, there's so many nuggets here. I think the marketing teams that have a field day with this stuff, right? They're going to go, you've done a great job, man. I mean, you articulate extremely well. I love your background. It's very diverse, but the military transition to what you're doing in the corporate, and you're like you're epitome of what a leader looks like and acts
Thank
like
you.
and communicates like. So like I can't wait to continue our conversation. Um, is anything that you want to leave here for next line of community? Right. Think about our persona, like
Yeah,
the folks listening, our leaders. They're guys that are just kids out of school. They just finished up. They're trying to get in the door. Any kind of feedback you want to leave them as from your perspective.
yeah, yes, there is. There was one question on the list pre-read. You said, what's the one piece of advice you wish you had received early in your career? I
Yes.
had a chance to visit or to hear someone speak about something called PIE, PIE, performance, image, and exposure. And one of the things that I was just a quick story. One of the things that when I left the military, I was like my performance. I was working my butt off, right? And I looked around and some of my peers were getting opportunities that I was not getting. Now, from a rating perspective, I felt like I was, pretty much even with them. But what I could not understand was why were they getting these opportunities? And I'm going to try to shorten it. But listening to performance, image, and exposure, I was taught growing up, keep your head down, do your job, da 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 da. But there are two other dynamics that you need to think about too. How do people see you? What's your image? What's your brand? And the other is how much exposure do you get organically in the company? When you break it down, the person who presented this said that, and I may get my numbers wrong, but I'm going to try to that performance was only 15% of your ability to get promoted. Image was
15.
about 15. Image was about 35%. And then
What?
the rest, I think, is maybe we're at 60 or 55% was exposure. How do people know you? When they talk about Vincent, what do they say? And what I learned was I can't just go into a room and just do my job and expect to accelerate. I've got to have an image, how people see me, and I've got to have exposure within the company. And I could talk with you about how this changed my career. But I went from being frustrated to really understanding what needed to happen. So I'm trying to think of the name of the book. I'll shoot it to you. I've got it on my shelf. But it's really around performance, image, and exposure. And I do presentations on this to people
Really?
because I do a little bit of public speaking. It was phenomenal, and it changed my whole perspective on my career. And I would say that if I had not got exposed to this, I don't know if my career would have done what it did. It was pretty amazing to understand performance, image, and exposure, otherwise known
I
as PI.
How long ago did it was? I mean that I haven't even.
I was a director, so I would say probably at least 12, 15 years ago. Because remember I told you earlier that it seemed like my career is kind of all of a sudden it kind of
Right.
That helped me a lot. That helped me to understand a lot. It helped me to navigate and to be more strategic about my career, not just thinking as long, because this is the thing, the fact that you can do your job, that's an expectation. You
You're
wouldn't
right.
be there if you couldn't do your job. What else do you bring to the table outside of being able to do that job? How well do you work with others? What would people say about Vincent when he's not in the room? How do I make sure that I'm getting exposure for other things that I can do, not just that one job? And that's a strategic dynamic associated with that. So that's what I would leave with people who are saying, okay, how do I kind of work my career? Because I've run into so many people, and I was one of them, that was just frustrated because I'm doing a good job, but I don't feel like I'm going anywhere.
Felt stuck a little bit.
Yeah. Now, it's not
Damn.
that you were stuck in a terrible place. It was
Yeah.
just that it was
Like,
just
you're ready for the next, but you're like stuck.
yeah, because I asked them, they said, well, you're really good at processes. You're really good at communicating. But I'm like, but I want to do more than that. I want to do this. I want to do that. And then I was told, yeah, but I never seen you do that. So I had to figure out, how do I show people what else I can do?
Quick question on it, if you don't mind me asking you. Were you doing a lot of those stuff, but you weren't just kind of, let's say, getting enough exposure of it? You maybe
Yep.
doing things, right? And like, but oh, you didn't know I was doing this? I could show you.
Yeah, I could show you. Or one nugget that one of my mentors told me is volunteer to do some things outside of your wheelhouse
Mm,
around people within the company that don't know who you are.
perfect. I couldn't agree with you more. I think, that's a little bit of advice I give a lot of the young, kids out of school. Focus on opportunity and like volunteer, knock on some doors like, hey, I want to learn X, but on your
Mhm.
time, like offer help. Like, you'd be surprised how that it pays itself and then some, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
it's like,
Yep.
I'm sure, yes, CIO, did you welcome open doors when some, a new grad or whatever that you employee says, you know what, I want to learn how to do BI, but I'm willing to dedicate my time on the weekend. Can you help me out? I'm sure there's plenty of work you could probably say, no
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah. No,
How long?
I enjoyed when new college graduates or others came into my organization, because I think it changed whole energy dynamic. Because they had that possibility thinking. And so for those of us like me who are from a different generation, sometimes you can just kind of, yeah, well, this is how we do it, da, da, da. But then you get somebody else and they say, well, have you thought about this? But you got to be open to it. You just can't shut them down.
No, no, no. Yeah, you got to have the environment to it's safe to ask those things and volunteer. But you're right. Sometimes when, like, maybe less experience is almost sometimes even better because, like, one, you can mold, right? They don't have
Hmm.
those happen yet. Or they may point out the obvious that you may be passing by every single day,
Yeah,
right? And
absolutely.
it, like
Absolutely.
that, fresh perspectives, I guess, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that was phenomenal. Thanks for bringing that up. So I did not know that you actually you deliver on this. You kind of speak about this, and you have literature. You have I guess a decks and things like that. You're able to give to executives. How does it work? Like how can the somebody at Next in Line reach out to you to be able to if somebody's interested in this stuff?
Well, I don't want to promote anything, but I do have a
I'm
website.
promoting you because that's awesome.
I do have a vincshorter.com, so they can go there and see the things that I speak on.
On your website. Okay, perfect. We'll
Yeah.
make sure that we add that to the show notes because I'll tell you, I think I love it, man. How long has that been? I got to look at that book. I'm gonna go right now and check it out. I'm gonna
Yeah,
say,
I'm
well,
gonna get the name of the name of the book is not called Pie. The name of the book is called something else, but I'll shoot it over to you so you know the name of it.
please.
But in terms of speaking, if you go to the website, you'll see some of the topics that I speak on,
Yeah.
and that's one of them.
I love it, man. I can't thank you enough for bringing that up, man. That was awesome. Don't you
Yeah.
might get a ticket down here in Miami, so be on the lookout.
Please let it be in February here so I can leave
February.
Chicago for a few days.
That's right. Oh, Chicago's about to get crazy right now. Wow. Right,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
man. Vince, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for
My pleasure.
thanks for sharing so many different nuggets. Like I mentioned, marketing teams don't have a blast. Be on the lookout, but thank you again, man. For spending the time with me.
My pleasure.